Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So now what we're discussing is where the Jawab al-Shart has a fa. So if you look back to our previous slides, we would be seen that if this examples we gave was where the Fa'l Mudari was a Jawab or the Fa'l Madi was a Jawab. So if there's a Fa'l Mudari, okay, on its own, without a Dhamma, without a Sin or Sawfa or Lan or anything, it's a Fa'l Mudari on its own, then that doesn't have a fa, rule of thumb. Yes? Or if they're both Madi, then they don't have a fa. The Jawab will not have a fa. Apart from that, for some reason they don't make it into a Qaida Kulliya. The books of Nahwa, they don't say, oh, well, in these conditions there's no fa, and they mention a whole list of instances where there is a fa. I'm not sure the benefit of doing that, but it gives you a good expansive list. So in summary, if the Jawab is Fa'l Mudari on its own, either it's affirmative or there's a nafi but with a la, yes, then what will happen? So dukhul fa'al al-jaza, this is coming up. Before we go into that, simple rule of thumb, if the Jawab is either Mudari Muthbat, a simple Mudari Muthbat, or a Mudari Manfi, but the negation comes with la, yes, or if it's Madi on its own, no qad, nothing, then in these cases, you see here, no fa. And apart from these, as a rule of thumb, apart from these, most cases will have a fa. So, if you have a Jawab as a Fa'l Mudari, Muthbat, and Muthbat means on its own, no other particles. Pure Muthbat and no other particles, no other additions. Or it's Manfi, but it's Nafi with Lam, then there's no fa. This is a rule of thumb just to get you through the initial, before you go through all the detailed rules. It's not the final rule, but this will get through because sometimes it can get very confusing. Or if it's Madi, then in this case there's no fa, generally as a rule of thumb, just to keep us up, our minds in place for now. And apart from these, then we must have fa. Everybody got the basic principle in mind? Okay? So what he's saying, يَجِبُ إِقْتِرَانُ الْجَوَابِ بِالْفَاءِ. Oh, sorry, this is not the book, this is my own notes I have made. Just to, I think it's easier and it's more structured. Okay, so that's why you were asking yesterday regarding, we had done it in Nuqatul I'rab, that the Fa'l Mudari, so the Jawab is always going to be Majzoom, lafzan or mahallan. When there's a fa, then the whole Jumla becomes Majzoom. The whole Jumla becomes Majzoom. Not the verb, but the whole Jumla becomes Majzoom. Do you understand the difference? And your question from yesterday? So if the Jawab is Madi, is Majzoom Mahal, that word, Madi is Majzoom Mahallan. If it's Mudari, then it's usually Majzoom Lafzan. If the Jawab has a fa, then that one word doesn't become Majzoom, the entire sentence of the Jawab becomes Majzoom, as mentioned in Nuqtul I'rab and Qawaidul I'rab. Have you understood? Does that explain your question from yesterday? Yes? So, this fa is called Fa'ul Jawab or Fa'un Rabitatun Lil-Jawab. Okay, now when do we need this? Let's break it down bit by bit. Number one, if the Jawab al-Shart is a Jumla Ismiya, then you have to have fa. So for example, وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٍ. So هو على كل شيء قدير is a Jumla Ismiya, you have to bring a fa. Correct? All Jumla Ismiya, no two things to ask about that. And as a side note, instead of fa, you can have idha fujaiya. Okay, if the shart is in or idha. So if the shart, the particle of shart, the kalimul mujazat, the kalima is used as a in or idha, instead of having fa on the jawab, you can have what? Idha on the jawab. It's called idha al-fujaiya. So for example here, the particle, the adat of shart that we are using is in. So وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. One is إِذَا هُمْ يَقْنَتُونَ, or في غير القرآن we can say فَهُمْ يَقْنَتُونَ. Yes? Understood? So, rule number one, Jumla Ismiya as a Jawab al-Shart must have fa, and in Jumla Ismiya you have this leniency or this leeway to change the fa into an Idha Fujaiya. Understood? Yes. Yes, correct. There would be a difference in meaning because yes. So fa would just mean إِذَا هُمْ يَقْنَطُونَ, and إِذَا would mean unexpected. It would have the fujaiya meaning in place. Okay? Right. The second situation. Now we're moving on from Jumla Ismiya. The second type of sentence is going to Jumla Fa'liya. Correct? So if Jumla Fa'liya, then you can have the fa'il can either be Madi, Mudari, Amar and Nahi. But what do you say regarding Amar and Nahi? They both can be categorized as Talabi. Okay? So we're doing Jumla Ismiya is finished. Then we're going on to Jumla Fa'liya. And Jumla Fa'liya the fa'il can either be what? Madi, Mudari, Amar, Nahi. But Amar, Nahi, we categorize them as one and we say this is going to be Talabi. So if it's Jumla Fa'liya and the fa'il is Talabi, then there you also have to have a Fa. So for example, whether it's Amar or whether it's Nahi. So for example, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ. So in is harfu shart, the jawab is ittabi'uni, which is an Amar Talab. So therefore you have to have a Fa. Understood? وَإِمَّا نَهْيٌ. For example, فَإِنْ عَلِمْتُمُوهُنَّ مُؤْمِنَاتٍ فَلَا تَرْجِعُوهُنَّ إِلَى الْكُفَّارِ. فَإِنْ عَلِمْتُمُوهُنَّ مُؤْمِنَاتٍ فَلَا تَرْجِعُوهُنَّ إِلَى الْكُفَّارِ. So if you know that they are believers, so this is shart. Jawab is what? لَا تَرْجِعُوهُنَّ. Do not return them, do not send them back. So jawab is talab, nahi, this in this form. So now you have to have a fa on the jawab shart. So far so good. So we've done Jumla Ismiya and we've done Jumla Fa'liya where there's a talab, which is includes both Amar and Nahi. Following? If the fa'il is neither Madi, Mudari, nor talab, but it's a fa'il jamid. What does jamid mean? A verb which has no conjugation, like asa. So you have af'al jamida. So if you have a fa'il jamid, like asa, there's no Mudari, no asa, ya'sa. The Madi occurs, but there's no Mudari or Amar form or ism al-fa'il. So then here you also have to have a fa on the jawab. In tarani, if you look at me, ana aqalla minka malan wa walada. Okay, I am less than you. So in tarani, so in is shart, and the jawab starts from here, fa asa. Yes, and this is the badal of ni. Okay, or it can maf'ul bihi thanin, sadda masad al-maf'ulain. Okay, so in is a shart and fa asa rabbi is a jawab shart, but because asa is what kind of fa'il? It's not Jumla Ismiya, it's a Jumla Fa'liya. But the fa'il is fa'lu talab. It's not a fa'lu talab, but fa'il jamid. So therefore you also have to have a fa on the jawab. Understood? Yes, following? Okay. Now we're moving on to fa'il madi. So generally in fa'il madi, we said, well, if the fa'il madi comes on its own, then that fa'il madi will have no fa. But in certain cases, when the fa'il madi is modified in certain aspects, then you have to bring a fa. Condition number one, it is affirmative, but it has qad. And sometimes this qad is mentioned, is not mentioned. So for example, if he has stolen now and today, then it's nothing of news or shock. فَقَدْ سَرَكَ أَخٌ لَهُ مِنْ قَبْلِ. So here you have the jawab, in yasriq shart, the jawab is fa'il mudari. And it's referring to a previous statement, so therefore you have the qad. And because of qad, you must also have fa on the jawab. Yes? So
if you find it naqis.
Correct.
If you find it naqis.
The word qad, you had that question in the class, I was listening to the recording. Qad, it can be used in two ways. Qad is for tahqiq, but it also has the element of the past present perfect tense, which means the action has been completed. The action has been completed, which means Zayd has sat. So if we say qad jalasa, it can mean, you can mean one meaning is to create emphasis, or number two is to show the completion of the action. So qad sami Allah for tahqiq, to show emphasis. And sometimes it can show has meaning, the present perfect tense, the completion of the action. Okay? So it has both elements in English translation. If you look, you find this in like the books of the Orientalists, those who have written English grammar books, English grammarians, or those who have written the translation is found in a few of them. I can't remember the names of the authors now, but a few of those books will have these translations. Should have mentioned this. This will probably not be mentioned in the Arabic books as such, but this is mentioned in the English books. So they said that you can also translate this in English as has. Okay? But most Arabic books simply mention tahqiq. Okay? Got it? Okay. So if it's ظاهرة إن يسرق فقد سرق أخ له من قبل. Yes, and it can be muqaddara if it's understood from before. أي إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت. إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت. If his shirt is torn from the back, then she has spoken the truth. Referring to a past event, she has spoken the truth. So understood here that qad is, we say is mahdhuf, but basically it is madhi referring to a previous event, not a future event. Because when the madhi comes on a shart, it usually implies the future. Man samata najah. Whoever does good, whoever stays quiet now in the present, he will be saved in the future. So when the madhi has a mustaqbil meaning, there's no fa. When the madhi has a past tense meaning, related past tense, it is indicated by qad, and therefore, whether the qad is mentioned or the qad is not mentioned, whether the madhi indicates a previous or prior event, then you have to have a fa. Do you understand? Are you following? Okay. Or if it's manfi, but the manfi is with ma. Correct? Manfi with ma. وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ فَمَا بَلَّغْتَ رِسَالَةً. If you do not propagate and you convey the message, then you have not, if you do not do this, which is mentioned in the previous verse, then you would not have conveyed your message. So again, you have fa'il madhi, but the negative particle is ma. Okay, so if you recap from the top. Jumla ismiya, what must we have? Jumla ismiya in all conditions. Fa, or you can have it replaced by idha al-fujaiyah, number one. Number two, after that we come to jumla fa'liya. If it's fa'il talab, whether it's amr or whether it's nahi, then what do we have to have in the jawab? The fa has to be there. Then after that we have jumla fa'liya, but the fa'il is jamid. Fa'il is jamid, then unconditionally you must have what? Fa. Now we're moving on to fa'liya with a fa'il madhi. So in summary, if it's affirmative, but it implies a past tense meaning, and this will be normally denoted by a qad, dhahira and muqaddara, then you also have to have what in the jawab? You have to have a fa. And if it's manfi with ma, then you also have to have a fa. So let's say for example, if you say for example, in ishtahadta, okay, fusta, you will be successful. Now because it's fusta, what does this mean? How do you translate this fusta? You will be successful. So I'm saying here, if you have worked hard, you will get good grades in the results. And if I'm saying to you, that's inishtahada fusta, this is what really? This is madhi, but mustaqbil ma'nan. Yes, that's what I'm referring to. That's a results-oriented teacher. But if I'm saying I'm not result-oriented, I'm saying inishtahadta. If you have worked hard, irrespective of your results, you have been successful. I'm not looking at results, I'm looking at your revision and your preparation. You have recapped it, you have prepared it. So now this is, you have acquired success. So now then what do you have here? فَقَدْ فُزْتَ. You see the difference? For fusta, you could, but yeah, you can have for fusta, but then that would imply that the qad is muqaddara, and you're not saying you will be successful, it means you have already become successful just by your efforts. And this is saying, well, hopefully you'll get good grades. And it's saying, no, you've already been successful. So if the fa'il madhi is to indicate a future meaning, then there's no fa. If it indicates a past event, then it has a fa, usually with qad. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we finish fa'il madhi. Ji, carry on. What's the question? A fa'il jamid is a verb which does not have a conjugation. So for example, you have the word asa. Asa is a verb, but it's not conjugated. Asa is an easy one. Another verb that's not conjugated. Laysa is fa'il naqis. It has a conjugation, but it doesn't have fa'il mudari. It's conjugated all the way through the madhi, but it has no mudari. So I don't know if you call that a jamid or not. But there are a few other verbs which don't have. So you have two types of fa'il. Fa'il mutasarrif and fa'il jamid. A fa'il mutasarrif is that verb which has a conjugation. Like daraba. So daraba yadribu darban, duriba yudrabu darban, idrib la tadrib daribun madrubun, then ismu tafdil, adrab daribun, adrab madrab, ismu zarf, etc. So this is conjugated fully, it's called a mutasarrif. Then lower than that you have some which are mutasarrif, but not tam mutasarruf. They only have, for example, some have madhi and mudari only, no amr. A few of the fi'l naqis are like that. They only have madi and mudari. Some only have madi. And some only have mufrad and mu'annas sighas, mudhakkar and mu'annas sighas. So a verb that is not conjugated, I'm not sure where the jamid link is. You must have a full conjugation or not. But if it's a verb that has a full conjugation, it's called jamid, like asa. You don't have a mudari of this. So therefore, if the verb in the jawab al-shart is one of these fi'lun jamid, it will not have a fa. It must have a fa. Does that clarify?
Okay, let me try and get some examples for.
لعل حرف مشبه بالفعل. And that will come under jumla ismiya. فلعلك. Because jumla ismiya. Okay? Any other questions? Is that clear now? Inshallah, I'll place I've got a book. It's got a whole set of. It's a whole book full of asma'ul jamida. I'll put it on the table. You can have a look at it later on, inshallah. Get idea of some of the jamid verbs. None are coming to mind, but it's a whole set of them. Okay? Shall we go ahead?
Okay, like in this case.
Okay.
People gathered saying.
Now moving on now, fi'l mudari. So we've already covered jumla ismiya. We've covered jumla fi'liya. And jumla fi'liya we've covered talabi. We've covered jamid, we've covered madi in some of its forms, the forms that have the fa, and the remaining forms will not have fa. And now we're doing fi'l mudari. So fi'l mudari, the forms which have a fa. Which are the forms that have a fa? If it's muthbat, but it has tanfis, harfu tanfis, meaning a particle which makes the mudari only for future, which is either seen or sawfa. If you have seen or sawfa, then the fi'l mudari must have a fa. If there's no harfu seen or no sawfa, then it becomes it has no fa. So for example, وَمَنْ يَسْتَنْكِفْ عَنْ عِبَادَتِهِ وَيَسْتَكْبِرْ فَسَيَحْشُرُهُم. So حَشَرَ يَحْشُرُ is fi'l mudari, it's muthbat, but because it's preceded by harf tanfis, it must have what? A fa. رابطة للجواب. Similarly, sawfa as well. وَمَنْ يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ أُدْوَانًا وَظُلْمًا فَسَوْفَ نُسْلِيهِ نَارًا. We say what? فَسَوْفَ makes its harf tanfis, it comes before the nuslihi, therefore you must have fa before it. Understood? And then we have manfi. Now there are two types of manfi. There's few types of manfi on fi'l mudari. If the manfi is la, then that doesn't affect. I mentioned that before. There's no fa. If it's lam, that makes it into madi, then the same principle will apply. Is it ma'nan, is it future or past tense? If it indicates future, there's going to be no fa. And lan will always have what? Fa. وَمَا يَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلَنْ يُكْفَرُوا. So here, whatever good you do, it will never be unappreciated. So here, lan is a fi'l mudari with lan, therefore you must bring a rabitatun lil jawab. Following? Yes? So where does that leave us now? I think I forgot here. Yeah, so here I didn't mention it. So if you go back, see this here? I forgot to highlight this. So regarding the Madi, what's left now? All of these. So after we look at the ones that do have fa, the ones that don't have fa is going to be a Madi, which is muthbat, because Madi manfi is already counted in here. So a Madi muthbat, which does not have qad, that will not have fa. And then in our mudari, we analyze all of them, we come to the conclusion that a muthbat without tanfis or a manfi without lam is remaining. That will have no fa. Correct? You following so far? So let's summarize again. Jumla ismiya, what's the rule of jumla ismiya? Fa. You must have a fa. Then after that we have jumla fa'liya. How many types of jumla fa'liya are there? The fa'il is either going to be what? Fa'il talabi. What's the rule of fa'il talabi? There should be a fa, but there's amar or nahi. After talabi we have fa'il jamid. The rule of fa'il jamid is it must have a fa. After that we're left with madi and mudari. Now so those are unconditional. Jumla ismiya, fa'il talabi and fa'il jamid. All of these without any further conditions they must have a fa. Then we have fa'il madi and fa'il mudari. What's the condition for fa'il mudari? If it has harfu tanfis, must have a fa. And the second condition, if it has, yeah, if it's Yeah, just keep lan, forget lam for now. If it's manfi bil lan, then it has a fa. Then in madhi, what do we say? If it is muthbat, but what does it have?
Sorry?
Qad, it must have a fa. Or if it's manfi, but what's the negative particle?
Yeah.
Fama ballagta risalata. The negative particle is ma. Then you must have a fa. So apart from those, you don't have a fa. But now he's saying here, وَيَجُوزُ الْوَجْهَانِ. If it's mudari muthbat, you have two options. If it's mudari muthbat, there's two options. What are two options? You can make it what? Fa or without fa. So for example, both are using the Quran. وَمَنْ عَادَ. Okay, it's mudari muthbat, no sin, no sawfa, but it still is a fa. في غير القرآن you can say وَمَنْ عَادَ يَنْتَقِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ. Correct? But when the fa comes, then the verb itself is not majzoom. What becomes majzoom? The whole jawabu shart sentence becomes majzoom. Are you following? Yes? And the second option is إِن يَكُن مِّنكُمْ. So إِن يَكُن, they makes this majzoom. إِشُونَ صَابِرُونَ, no fa. So therefore this فعل مضارع becomes what? Majzoom. And there's no fa, so this becomes majzoom. So you have wajhan. So في غير القرآن you could have said وَمَنْ عَادَ يَنْتَقِمِ اللَّهُ مِنْ. Or you could say إِن يَكُن مِّنكُمْ إِشُونَ صَابِرُونَ في غير القرآن فَيَغْلِبُونَ مِئَتَيْنِ. Correct? Yes? And if it's manfi billah, you have an option. Here you have an option as well. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَلَا يَخَافُ ظُلْمًا وَلَا حَظْمًا. فَلَا يَخَافُ ظُلْمًا وَلَا حَظْمًا. This is jawabu shart. It must have a fa. And because it has a fa, the mahal, this does not get affected. But the whole jawabu shart is deemed to be fi is majzoom. It's Arab. The whole jumla is fi mahal is majzoom. Correct? And fi ghayri al-Quran, what we have said, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ لا يخف ظلما ولا حظما. Yes?
Yeah, that is right.
Understood?
That is the reason. That is the reason.
And there, and what's left now? The madhi. So the madhi, if it's without qad, you have to, yamtani ul-fa, you can't bring a fa. Yes? Correct? Whether it's madhi, without qad, whether the meaning, the word is madhi, ahsantum, ahsantum. Yes? Oh, it's madhi, but the meaning is madhi, not in word, but in sigha. In kharajtu lam akhruj. This is mudari in sigha, but in meaning what is this? Madhi. Because when lam comes, qalb al-madhi, qalb al-mudari madhiyan. Lam makes mudari into the madhi meaning. So now when lam comes, so when you have a madhi without qad, whether it's a sigha of qad, or the sigha of madhi, or the meaning of madhi, you can't bring fa. Okay? So let's do one more summary. This is very important. One more summary. So start from the beginning. And we can do all together. So sentence number one is jumla ismiya. Unconditionally, you must have a fa. Jumla ismiya is out of the way. I think I actually got slide next one here. Okay? So this is how we look at it. So let's start from here. Jumla ismiya. Unconditionally, you must have a fa. Correct? If you have a fa'al jamid, unconditionally, you must have a fa. Fa'al talab, unconditionally, you must have a fa, whether it's amr or whether it's nahi. I'm not sure why I've done it from the left to right, but yes. If it's manfi with lan, you must have a fa. Yes? Correct? Now when it's manfi with lam, what happens now? You can't have a fa. Because now what? What is it? It is now madhi. So this not moves away, this moves over to this category. And therefore there's no fa. If you have mudari, manfi with la, what do you have? Choice, wajhan. Harfu tanfis, you must have a fa. If it's fa'il mudari, harfu tanfis, must have a fa. And if it's without tanfis, then wajhan. Correct? And if you have madhi, if it's with qad, then you must have what? Fa. If it's without qad, fa is mumtani. So if you summarize it, look at this theory. So when it's madhi without qad, or something that has a meaning of madhi and no qad, then it's mumtani. Correct? And in the mudari, which is muthbat or manfi billah, you have wajhan. And everywhere else you must have a fa. That makes sense? Any questions regarding that? So we've explained an introduction to this. We'll go through a text of Hidayatun Nahw inshallah tomorrow. But if you understood the concept, so just recap it. So you can access the slides later on and recap. But this is very important. Yes? Okay. Any questions? You can go over it. If you have any questions, you can ask me tomorrow inshallah. Okay? Subhanallah wa bihamdihi subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.